члени наукового товариства імені Шевченка в Канаді. Добрий вечір. Я називаюся Дар'я Веревич. Як голова наукового товариства імені Шевченка в Канаді я маю велику честь і приємність привітати всіх вас сьогодні вечора на нашій черговій науковій доповіді. Я особливо вітаю всіх тих, яких рідко ми тут бачимо на доповідях, і заохочую приходити частіше. Якщо ви не дістаєте від нас повідомлення, то прошу зголоситися до пані Христі Колос і подати їй вашу електронну адресу, і ми дуже радо будемо висилати вам повідомлення. Я особливо хочу привітати нашу доповідачку, доктор Ренату Конрад, професора оперативної та індустріальної інженерії Фойс бізнес-школи в Ворстер політехнічному інституті Масачусетс. Багато з нас знає її як Ренату Копач, дочку членів наукового товариства імені Шевченка, магістра Юрія Копача і покійної магістр Галини Копач. Знаємо її також як внучку літературознавця і директорки курсів країнознавства імені Сковороди, блаженної пам'яті доктор Олександри Копач і відомого пластового діяча, пластуна сеньора Романа Копача. Я особисто пам'ятаю її як пильну ученицю курсів країнознавства імені Чоловіків, де я мала приємність її вчити. Рівно ж маю честь привітати доктор Оксану Винничку, почесного консула Канади у Львові. Я повинна додати, що вона є членом наукового товариства імені Шевченка. Я рівно ж хочу привітати пана Віктора Гетьманчука, президента КАФ, це є Canada Ukraine Foundation. Тепер черга поділитися з вами новиною, що цього року, як і минулого, до Канади на стажування прибуло 51 студент з України з рамени канадської програми MyTax. 5 з них виступлять в п'ятницю, 21 червня, здається, що в цій кімнаті, на останній імпрезі НТШ перед літом. Вони розкажуть нам про свою дослідчу працю на канадських університетах, тому заохочую всіх прийти і послухати наших майбутніх науковців і дослідників. Як відомо, товариство робить відеозаписи доповідей і поміщує їх на мережі товариства. Цим займається член дирекції інженер Олесь Дурницький, але сьогодні при апараті ми маємо секретаря НТШ пана Ігора Топова. Доповідь професор Конрад, як і всі попередні доповіді, можна послухати на каналі товариства на YouTube, вийшовши на наш веб-сайт www.ntsh.ca. І на кінець маленьке оголошення, а саме, що книжка доктор Олександри Копач «Нові обрії стародавньої України» є на столі при вході, і як хтось зацікавлений, прошу її собі взяти на пам'ять. Рівно ж на тому ж столі є старі видання українських дисидентів і матеріали про них, тобто український вісник, який також можна взяти, як хтось є зацікавлений. Кінчаючи, складаю подяку пані Христі Колос, референції прес, дирекції НТЕШ, за організацію вечора, панові Томкові за відеозапис і це Андрій Кенферзовський відповідає за техніку? Ні, дякую. Особлива подяка Українському культурному центрові на руки голови центру, шановної пані Дар'ї Лучі, та фундації «Будучність» на руки шановного голови пана Романа Медика за можливість влаштувати чи влаштовувати доповіді товариства «Огнев». До представлення шановної доповідачки і переведення вечора я попрошу члена дирекції товариства, старшого наукового співробітника Risk Analytics і Business Analytics фірми IBM та ад'юнкт-професора факультету прикладних наук та інженерії на Торонтонському університеті доктора Олександра Романка.
Пані Дар'я, дуже дякую. Я сьогодні маю велику честь представити професора Ренату Конрад, яка сьогодні буде говорити про галузі, які ми знали в минулому під назвою дослідження операцій, Operations Research, яке якраз і почалося з дослідження військових операцій під час Другої світової війни, де за допомогою таких математичних наук, як статистика, аналітика даних, штучний інтелект, машини навчання, зберігали життя багатьох людей. Після війни, те, що ми знаємо, як дослідження операцій, менеджмент сайенс, аналітика стала розповсюджуватися на компанії, організації, які за допомогою цих моделювання і аналітики поліпшували свої бізнес-процеси. І пізніше, звичайно, ця наука про дані або дослідження операцій розповсюдилися на багато сфер людського життя. І сьогодні ми послухаємо, як моделювання і аналітика застосовується для боротьби з торгівлею людьми. Пані Рената працює професором з операційного і індустріального інженірінгу в ФОСі бізнес-школі Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Також вона є членом дорадчих комітетів торгівлі людьми Американського державного департаменту транспорту та Американського державного департаменту національної безпеки. Має дуже багато публікацій в цій сфері. Пані Рената має PhD з школи індустріального інженірінгу університету Purdue, а також закінчила магістратуру і бакалаврат на департаменті Mechanical and Industrial Engineering в університеті Торонто, де я маю також велику честь бути професором за сумісництвом. Давайте привітаємо пані Ренату. Дякую.
Дуже вам дякую. Я буду старатися говорити без мікрофону. Якщо мене не чути, дайте мені знати. Це велика честь тут бути в Торонті. Я знаю, виросла тут і багато людей знають в цій кімнаті. Дуже вам дякую. Перше я вам хотіла пояснити, що це є індустріальна інженерія. І це має коріння в виробництво, в production systems. І індустріальні інженери, вони розуміють, як організувати системи. Чи то військові, чи то в фабриках. Вони розуміють, як, якщо я, наприклад, маю фабрику аут, скільки мені аут треба виробити, звідки ці опони мають, де я їх маю дістати, скільки мені треба замовити, як я їх маю перевозити. Ці рішення, ми вживаємо математику і аналітику, щоб зробити такі рішення. Я працюю і працювала в цій ділянці тут в Торонті, в Warehouse Distribution Systems, де Лаблас і в Торонтонських шпиталів. Але під час своїх студій при Торонтонському університеті я їхала на табори приятелі дітей, Help Us Help the Children. І це щось 20 років тому було, коли я їхала. І ці табори, це для дітей в інтернатах. І одного року на цьому таборі я зустріла таку дівчину Женю. І я намисно її фотографію тут не поставила, але ця Женя зі мною мала розмову. їй щось було 18 років, або наближалося, і вона казала: Ренато, я якраз тепер, мені майже 18 років, вона має писати з інтернату, і хтось мені написав того листа. Він називається Джон, він з Флориди. І він обіцяв, що якщо я вийду заміж з ним, то він мене візьме до Диснейленд. І мені було щось 20 чимось років. Я собі подумала, щось тут добре не сидить. Я їй це сказала. Я не знаю, що з нею сталося, я не знаю, де вона опинилася, але ця розмова завжди зі мною залишилася. І протягом своїх років я завжди про нього думала і про цю розмову думала. Я читала, де чула таке слово торгівля людей, human trafficking. Я собі так почала думати, я є інженер, я розумію, як творити системи, я розумію logistics, я розумію supply chains. Чи торгівля людей, чи це не є supply chain? Industrial engineers, ми організуємо, як перевозити речі від пункту А до пункту Б, чи перевозити людей від пункту А до пункту Б, чи є подібності між цим. І останніх 4 роки я почала працювати, власне, в цій ділянці. І сьогодні, що я хочу вам пояснити, як я вважаю, що індустріальні інженери можуть працювати в тій ділянці, що є можливості, і просто мої думки про що ця ділянка може робити. Я хочу вам пояснити, що є торгівля людей, що це є Operations Research, дослідження операцій. Дати 3 приклади моєї роботи. Я буду говорити по англійській мові. Я не могла всі слова перекласти, але я розумію в 2 мовах і дуже радо при кінці можу відповідати в українській мові, якщо маєте запити. So as I mentioned, industrial engineers are people who understand supply chains. They make supply chains efficient. And the last couple of years, I've realized that there can be parallels between a human supply chain, when a product is a human being, rather than a product being a produced good. So first I'll define what human trafficking is. So human trafficking, simply put, is the commercial exchange of a human being. It's often thought of...
the microphone, we can't hear you.
Sure, yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, it's soft spoken. It's better? Okay. So human trafficking is often thought of as sex trafficking, but it encompasses much more than that. It encompasses labor trafficking, so fishing, a lot of trafficking in fishing, begging, circus workers, hospitality workers, and of course sexual trafficking. Trafficking is defined as exploitation of a human when they're being forced to do something that they do not want to do. And this is not necessarily physical force, it could be coercion, fear, or deception. The scale of the problem is massive. A conservative estimate is that 25 million people are exploited, or trafficked annually across the globe. The implications, at least aside from the moral aspect of it, an economic point of view, it's considered the 2nd largest illegal industry in the world after drugs trafficking. And there's estimates that about $150 billion is generated by this industry annually. One of the most compelling statistics that I find, there's an article written in the Huffington Post in 2017 that the average hipster employs 27 slaves a day. And I refer to this article because it affects every one of us. So the t-shirts that we wear, there's a reason why they're $8. The coffee that we drink, the plastic, pink tricycle that I have for my daughter, it could be made by child labor somewhere else. So the scale of the problem is massive. It tends to be hidden, but it affects every one of us. I like to use, I want to discuss this more, but the scale of the problem, it's illicit. It's an illicit market. The extent of the problem is not exactly known. There's estimates that only 100,000 victims have been identified, and this has important implications for decision making and for policy making. It also differs in the region of the world. So the pink bars represent the estimates of the volume of sex trafficking in a region. The blue represents labor trafficking. So as you can see, sorry, I like to walk when I talk. In the Americas, it's about 50-50 between, so it's about 50-50 between labor and sex trafficking. In Europe, it tends to favor, there tends to be more cases of sexual trafficking. Within the different types of trafficking, it also varies as to who is being trafficked. So if you just consider forced labor, again, there's differences in regions of the world. On the right-hand side, the blue represents males, the pink represents females. So if we consider forced labor cases, Europe tends to have more males, whereas in the South Asia region, most of the victims tend to be females. So again, this has important implications for policy making and for decisions, which I'll discuss as we go through the talk. So over the last couple of years, I began reading about the problem and realizing the scale of the problem. But what I didn't realize was that it also impacts me and that it happens in my own backyard. This is one of the articles that really perked up my ears. Americans love football. And I began noticing there's news reports about sexual trafficking activities whenever there's a big sporting event. And I know the Raptors were playing yesterday. I actually guarantee you that the trafficking supply chains were bringing people into the city last night. So this was one of the eye-openers that, yes, it does happen near me. I live in a very nice upscale suburb of Boston. It's kind of the picture-perfect white picket fences. And 2 years ago, I opened up a newspaper to see that there were 2 cases of human trafficking in Massachusetts, which shocked me. What shocked me even more was last summer, my children go to the class camp at Grafton. And last summer, I was in Coburg on King Street speaking to some of the shop owners, and they said, oh yeah. And she was asking me what I do, and she said, oh yeah, Coburg has a massive sex trafficking problem. And I was like, really? And in March this year, Northumberland County actually appointed a task force and hired a police officer to combat trafficking in the Coburg area. So Canada is considered a Tier 1 country. The United States Department of State classifies, according to a 4-tier system, how countries respond to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. So Tier 1 is the highest, Tier 3 is the lowest. Tier 1 means that the country's government is doing the minimal amount to meet this act. So Canada and the United States are ranked the best at Tier 1. But Canada has been criticized for lack of national strategy to combat human trafficking. And despite the fact that the number of victims identified has been increasing over the number of years, but the number of convictions is actually falling. Ukraine is known as a Tier 2 country. So again, it's Tier 1 is the best, Tier 2 the second. Ukraine is known as a Tier 2 country, which means it's making improvements, but it does not meet the minimum standards of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Ukraine is known as a source, a destination, and a transit country. The latest statistics I could find were that in 2016, about, I think, 380 people were identified as victims. Roughly half were male, half were female. But just in contrast, 95% of the victims identified in Canada were females. In Ukraine, I forgot what I was going to say about Ukraine. But it is classified as a Tier 2 country. Oh, and there's an estimated 230,000. So almost 250,000 people that are estimated to have been trafficked in Ukraine. And these numbers are, of course, likely underreported because it's so difficult to identify, and likely growing with 2 million internally displaced people. But Ukraine is receiving accolades for its increasing efforts in identifying, trafficking, and promoting awareness. So as I mentioned, me personally, I've had, over the last couple of years, a growing awareness of the scale of the problem, that it is not just somewhere overseas, but it does happen in my backyard. And in 2014, the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime issued a plea to social scientists saying that there is a need for evidence-based practices to inform policy. And I listened to that, and I really thought, well, I think engineers can do something as well. And I'm one of the first engineers and the first operations researchers to work in this area. And I do think industrial engineers can make an impact because we are very good at being able to redirect limited resources. And what I mean by this is that the scale of the problem does not match the funding associated to it. So in the United States, 300 times funds allocated towards drug trafficking are 300 times what is allocated to the fight against human trafficking. Kevin Bales at the University of Nottingham estimates that $13.5 billion is needed to eradicate human trafficking. The United Nations in 2012 wanted to fund $20 million worth of projects, and it was only able to fund $2 million. So there's an extreme lack of resources available to address the problem of human trafficking. And this is why I think industrial engineers have potential to work in this area. So, maybe you haven't thought about this, but when you think of engineering and math, and in the context of human trafficking, does anything come to your mind? So, most people, when they think math, human trafficking, they think of statistics. And statisticians have made significant inroads in this area over the past, I'd say, 5 years. Last month in Washington, D.C., the National Academy of Engineers convened statisticians to work on prevalence estimation and developing statistical methods to understand the prevalence of trafficking so that policies can be created to address human trafficking. Computer science and data science also is making impacts in this area. I know some researchers who work in the dark web, who look for traces in financial markets, in illicit trading, wildlife trafficking, believe it or not, has some connections. And there have been a lot of inroads by researchers in computer science and data science. But where I'm coming from is I'm interested in the operations. So I'm interested in how can I make, I'm interested in the operations of anti-trafficking efforts. I'm interested in, can I break these supply chains? I know that there's limited resources. How can I make the best use of them? And I use something called operations research, which is a branch of mathematics. And this is an application of advanced mathematics. It's used to analyze complex systems, and it's used to guide decision making. And there's different types of math encompassed in operations research. And I'm one of the first people to recognize that, or that I believe we can use this to combat trafficking. And the reason I think we can use this is because these decision making in anti-trafficking operations is complex. There's a number of perspectives to consider. So for example, I was working with an NGO in Nepal, and they are interested in, they build these shelters for victims of human trafficking, and they want to rehabilitate the survivor, they want to reintegrate them with their family, but they also want to prosecute the traffickers themselves. And with trafficking is very closely linked to migration. So often where the survivor is found is not necessarily where they're from. Also where services are offered tends to be in larger cities, maybe not where the person is from. So this NGO was having a problem of, okay, we want to bring these shelters, we have incredible transportation costs, we want to locate it here because it's close to medical services, here because it's close to families, where we put this shelter when you have very little money. And this is a classic facilities location problem in operations research. We do this with warehouses. We do this when we design supply chains. Where do we locate the warehouse? The parallel is where do we locate the shelter for survivors? When I work in this area, I also recognize that it's an iterative decision. It's an iterative process. So there's a lot of understanding what the decision is, who the decision makers are, who is involved, understanding the context, and I'll talk about that later. I develop mathematical models, and I analyze and discuss the results. And really what I'm doing is I'm providing a form of decision support. So my mathematical models will help an NGO, a policymaker, a government make decisions, and it's weighed against what are the alternatives. I'm informing them, I'm not dictating a solution, and I'm able to perform what's called scenario analysis or what-if analysis. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how I do this. But I want to start with, so I said this problem of locating a shelter is sort of like locating a distribution center. There's parallels, but not quite. And this is a paper that I wrote in 2017 describing my thoughts on what the differences are between using analytics, operations research, and industrial engineering in this type of context. Because there's a number of challenges that the math is not able to address that we can use in manufacturing. So when I work in a manufacturing environment, I know what I'm producing, I know how much I'm producing, I know where it's coming from, I know the costs. In a human trafficking supply chain, it's a lot different. So I'm going to briefly describe some of these challenges, what these challenges are, very briefly, and describe what I think the mathematical inroads in them will be. So the first big challenge is that my product in my supply chain is hidden. So these victims are difficult to identify. They may not be able to identify. They may not know they're being trafficked. It's called hidden in plain sight. There's actually an excellent article in the New York Times about human trafficking in nail salons in New York City. So again, I don't know where my product is, which has implications for the mathematical models that I build. Traffickers are covert. Traffickers, one of my colleagues, Meredith Dank, she's in New York, she actually goes into prisons and she interviews what she calls the dumb ones, the traffickers who got caught. And she looks at their business models, and they actually do have business models. They have retirement plans. They not unions, but they have these agreements. And she has come up with, she works to understand their business model. But they're incredibly dynamic. Some traffickers are able to adapt. I worked with a prosecutor in Florida who he told me he would follow Airbnb around because Airbnbs were being rented out as brothels. Which again has implications for my supply chain when I'm trying to understand what my supply chain is. The data are fragmented. So when again, in a manufacturing environment, I have logs from, I have logs that tell me how much is being produced, when it's being produced, what the demand is, where it's going. In the human trafficking context, data about the victim or the survivor tends to be with the NGOs and the service provider. Data about the traffickers tends to be with the authorities, law enforcement, and it's very difficult, again, to paint a picture of that supply chain. Extremely limited resources, which I address. So there's limited resources to address the problem, there's limited resources to invest in addressing the problem. However, briefly mention this. I think there's some really interesting mathematical applications that can be done to address these challenges. Very briefly, I'm just going to mention, actually I'm just going to put these up on the slide, of some of the innovations I think mathematically that can be done to address some of these challenges, and we're actually going to provide examples. Actually, I'm going to skip over this one. One interesting mathematical thing that I think is industrial engineers in the last 20 years have developed interdiction models. So these are mathematical ways of looking at a network and deciding where to break that network. And two of my colleagues, one at Carnegie Mellon and one at Rochester Institute of Technology, they work with drug traffickers, and they look and they decide where on the drug trafficking chain, which chain should we break along that route. Who should we take out from a cost efficiency point of view? So I'm working with them to think through the problem in terms of human trafficking. And the difference is, in drug trafficking, once that drug is given to the end user, it is consumed and it is gone. Okay? In a human trafficking supply system, once that human can be reused over and over and over and over again for years. And it is different mathematical implications in network interdiction modeling. In terms of data fragmentation, there's techniques to fuse data. There's techniques for using game theory to illustrate the benefits of interagency cooperation for data sharing. But I'm going to spend the rest of today talking about applications in resource allocation decisions. So if I have a limited amount of money, how do I best distribute it in the most cost-efficient way? And I'm going to give you 3 examples looking at resource allocation problems. So 3 examples I'm going to talk about, sort of on the supply chain. The first example is going to be kind of towards the end of the supply chain. Second example is going to be in the middle of the beginning of the supply chain, and the last example is going to be throughout the supply chain. So the first example I'm going to talk about is building shelters for human trafficking survivors. And this work was inspired by conversations with Covenant House. I know that there's a Covenant House in Toronto, there's Covenant Houses in the United States as well. So shelters for trafficking survivors are extremely important. It's a large financial investment, but it is seen as, kind of as a moral obligation from society to help rehabilitate these victims. And there's different types of shelters. There's short-term, emergency, transitional, and long-term rehabilitative shelters. And I'm working with these ones, and I'm working only with survivors of sexual trafficking. These are different than homeless shelters and domestic violence shelter in that their length of stay requirements are different. They have very specialized care, and most importantly, the shelter location has to be undisclosed. And this is because, I think the term is honeypot. Traffickers tend to hang out near domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, and especially shelters for trafficking victims, because they know they can bring somebody back into the life. Or that's the term that is used. So this problem began with the Covenant House, and they were trying to decide where to locate a shelter because the cost of transportation, of transporting survivors, was astronomical and actually outweighed the cost of running the shelter. So they had different survivors had different needs, very specialized needs, and the transportation costs were too much. So that project began with this, kind of went into something else, but I'll show you where it's going. So we looked at what the demand is for shelter. We don't know. We don't actually know who's being trafficked, how many people are being trafficked, but the United States does have a national hotline that's been operating for several years, and we know by state what the call volume is. So the darker the state, the more calls that state has received. So Nevada is the black, Las Vegas, not surprising, lots of calls about human trafficking in that state. We also looked at the number of shelters in a state. So again, darker means more. The state of California has the most shelters. The state of Nevada has none. But we also recognize that even if you put a shelter in place, that still doesn't help a person. There has to be a lot of support systems. There has to be legislative environment to support a person once they're out, to get the person in. So Polaris, which runs the National Trafficking Hotline in the United States, they've actually compiled a list detailing the state's legislative response to trafficking survivors. And it's a 4-tier system, and not all states are being equal. So again, the darker the state, the better. So the state of Washington is actually the most legislatively supportive of trafficking survivors. So when we're considering where to build a shelter, there's more than just where to replace it. There's more than just cost. There's what types of services can we offer? Are there existing shelters in the neighborhood? How responsive is the community? Additional services, medical services, job training services. It's a very, very complicated, which traditionally is considered an operations research problem, a facility location. It's much more than just where do I put a warehouse. So we were tasked with the question, given a limited budget and widespread need, how do we determine where to invest next? And how many shelters should we fund? And I should also say that in 2015, this hotline received 34,000 phone calls. There's only 800 long-term beds in the United States. It doesn't mean that 34,000 people are looking for beds, but you can imagine at the scale of the problem that the demand will never be satisfied. So given we have a very limited budget, where do we put this shelter? So the benefits of using a model is we can very quickly, I'll show what I mean by quickly, compare different possible solutions, possible options. And a model provides suggestions of how we can meet a certain goal. And in this case, we define a goal kind of like profit. We said societal benefit, less cost. So traditionally in industrial engineering, we are concerned with profit, revenue less cost. In this context, there is no revenue, and we considered a proxy for societal benefit. So I use something called linear programming.
Лінійна оптимізація.
Лінійна оптимізація. And we have decisions to make. We use binary variables. A binary variable, if that variable, when I solve that model, is a 1, it means that yes, put this type of shelter into this type of location. If that binary variable in my solution has a value of 0, it means do not put a shelter of this type in that solution. So to give you an understanding of the scale of the problem, I had 3.5 million decisions to make. I had 50 states, 2 types of shelters, up to 5 shelters per state. That's 3.5 million alternatives to consider in this model. So my goal, again, is to maximize societal benefit. So we spent some time on this, but we looked at we looked at lost productivity, so how much money would be gained if somebody were rehabilitated. We had a function for, we assume not everyone's going to be fully rehabilitated in a shelter. So productivity gained by rehabilitating somebody, whether or not shelters exist in that state, the legislative environment, the decrease in criminal justice costs, and healthcare costs. So that was considered a societal benefit. And we spent a while modeling this, less operating and capital costs, and depreciated over 20 years. Then we had some rules. So we had some rules that only a certain number of shelters can be built in each state, no more than X number of shelters of this type and that type, and these are called constraints. So this is a mathematical model. Again, when I solve it, during the solution process, it looks at 3.5 million different decisions to make, and it produces an answer for me. And my answer can look something like this. So again, this is a state of the United States. Sorry, a picture of the United States. The color means that there's a shelter in the state. And currently, there's along the top you'll see MSAR, which stands for Missouri, Arizona, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Kentucky, and there's 0 states. There's 0 shelters in that state. What my model will tell me is where to place a shelter. So let's say I have a budget of $1 million, which is actually quite a lot. As I mentioned, it's a resource-constrained area. If I have $1 million, my model, given all those factors that I'm able to consider, the best solution, the optimal solution, is to place 1 large shelter in Louisiana. If I have $2 million, I can place 2 large shelters, 1 in Louisiana, 1 in Arkansas, and a small shelter in Louisiana as well. If I have $3 million, my model will tell me again where I can optimally place these shelters. I can also make changes. So let's say my budget is $2 million. I can rerun my model. This is my model with a model solution with $2 million. But I can say, actually, my goal isn't societal benefit, less costs. My goal is just the cheapest locations. If I just consider the cheapest locations, I can actually place 6 small shelters with $2 million. If I just consider, in the cheapest locations, but it's 44% less, quote-unquote, overall benefit in that case. If I want to just consider the legislative environment, the best locations are, I believe it's Virginia and Delaware, but it's 61% less, quote-unquote, overall benefit. If I just consider demand, the best location is 1 large shelter in California. So there's different alternatives I can explore. So some of the benefits of using a mathematical model is I can quickly compare many different factors. I can provide suggestions that best meet a decision maker's goal, whatever that goal is. If it's cheapest location, where the most victims are, whatever that goal is, the model can provide an answer. It's also adaptable. I can change. What if less money were available? Where would that shelter go? What if the capacity of shelters were increased? What if I considered another factor? So I can change these things in this model. I can change parameters in this model and provide the different answers fairly quickly for a group of decision makers. So what I'm doing now with this is I'm actually working with the mayor's city of New York, and New York City has a very vulnerable homeless population. Many come to New York, very high risk of trafficking. The mayor's office has decided they want to address this, so I'm going to be working with the city of New York to establish capacity planning for shelters for trafficking victims and a deployment strategy for them. I'm also working with the United States. Maybe you know, right now there's a lot of asylum seekers coming from the southern border. So in September, I'm going to be working with some organizations in Texas looking at designing shelters on the Texas border, because with migration, with smuggling, there's also high risk of trafficking. So that's one project. Second project, so that was kind of at the end of the supply chain for survivors. Another project I'm working at is pre-trafficking, beginning of the supply chain. And I've been working for a couple of years with an NGO, a non-government organization in Nepal. And formerly Tiny Hands, now it's called Love Justice International. And their premise is they want to stop trafficking before it happens. And they recognize that human trafficking is very often, it occurs to vulnerable people. So somebody wants a better life. They maybe migrate looking for work. And Nepal is not a wealthy country. Many people from Nepal migrate to India looking for work. And this organization has paid staff along the border of India and Nepal trained to look for signs of trafficking, suspicious signs. if they suspect something, they will pull the person or people aside and ask them a set of standardized questions. Questions such as, were you married in the last 2 weeks? Does the person look drugged? Do they know where they're going? Do they have their papers with them? If a certain number of red flags are met, a group of people are pulled aside and asked a much more specific set of questions. So this organization has been doing this for about 6 years, and again, the intent is to stop somebody before they're being trafficked. They've been doing this for about 6 years, and when I found this out, I was like, wow, you guys have all this data. You actually have 365 data fields that probably has great data over the last 6 years. We can do something with this. And this work is actually funded by the National Science Foundation in the US. And we began looking at when are people crossing? You know, what days of the week, times of the year, earthquakes in Nepal, does this have any effect? To give you an understanding of where Nepal is, it's kind of a mountainous region. It's bordered by India and Bangladesh. And we were interested, again, in looking for supply chains. And what we were able to do, we were able to look over the 6 years of where people were coming from and where they're crossing. And the thickness of the bar indicates volume. So the thicker the bar, the more people going from that one area to another area. What it does show is over the 6 years, these patterns are changing. And now we're looking for why are they changing. I was also able to look and see where people are coming from. So again, over the last 6 years, the darker, it's called the Village District Council, the larger the VDC, the more people are coming from that area. So again, what you see is that there's patterns of where people are coming from. We're also able to understand how people are recruited into being trafficking. It's probably hard to read from the back of the room. Mainly it's from their community. So they know someone that tricks them, or coerces them, or deceives them somehow. So what does this mean? So now we know who is being trafficked. I didn't actually show we have lots of information about the demographics of age and literacy levels. We have the profiles of these people. We know when they're being trafficked. We know where they're going, where they think they're going, where they're from, where they're crossing, and we know how they're being tricked or how they're being recruited. So what are we going to do with this information? I'm going to tell you that, but I also want to say that with this project, what really, really struck me as an engineer was the vulnerability of people. And I mean, these are all people that want something better in their lives. They're all somebody who is looking to improve their own livelihoods. There are people there with master's degrees in Nepal, you know, who have been trafficked. And I'm actually just going to say that aside. In going through this work, what I realized is these people want a better life, and that no matter what, as an engineer, I can say or do, I still have to recognize and respect they have a right to individual agency. So they have a right to make a decision whether or not to choose to migrate. And that has been an important implication in my work because I'm designing these beautiful, elegant, I don't know if you want to call them beautiful or elegant mathematical models, but they do have implications and that someone at the end is making a decision. So I started to look at this and I said, well, these people are going to, they want a better life. They might decide that the risk is worth it. But can we look at prevention campaigns and prevention planning? And this is actually one area of work where I do think industrial engineers can work. So prevention campaigns, here's a poster in Nepal warning about the dangers of migration. Again, it respects an individual's right to choose to migrate, but here's what can happen. The issue with some of these prevention campaigns is that NGOs just, you know, not all of them have an evidence base of what is most efficient, what is most, where to put the money. So what I'm trying to do is illustrate that there are mathematical ways to show the efficacy of a program. So again, I used linear programming, and the idea was to provide an evidence base for an NGO of where to redistribute a limited amount of funds. The objective is to increase pre-trafficking awareness, recognizing that people have the right to migrate, but they are at risk of being trafficked. We looked at two types of interventions, so television ads and community-based ads, so people going out into the community and talking, and we looked at two different types of populations. So again, I used linear programming, where the decision was how much, my decision is not a binary variable, but it's a continuous variable of how much money should I allocate towards a particular type of intervention. I used exponential production functions to illustrate the relationship between dollar invested, change in the proportion of the subgroup that are made aware. And then I had, again, budgetary constraints and cost constraints, indicating how much a certain type of intervention would cost. So again, this is to inform a decision maker. I can inform a decision maker, if you have $500,000, how should you allocate your money? Or what are the options? If I choose to maximize awareness levels across all populations, here's one suggestion of how to allocate your money for the greatest impact. If you choose to allocate money according to proportion of incidence, so there's more people coming from the rural areas, we're going to allocate more to the rural areas, here's how you should allocate your funds. If you choose to allocate it for program equity, so 50% in television, 50% in community-based interventions, here's how you should allocate your money for the greatest impact. So again, these are just ways to inform a decision maker. So what we're doing, so now some of the ongoing work is actually redesigning some of the data collection tools that we have, redesigning the survey, looking at something called data envelope analysis, which I have no idea how to say, a DEA. No, okay. So looking at measuring the efficiency of stations. We have a lot of work in the data science aspect of addressing the data. Third and final project I want to mention is fishing and labor trafficking. So this is a project I'm beginning now. It's with some colleagues at WPI and at Texas. And this I had a conversation with somebody about illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. I was like, what on earth is this? And what does this have to do with trafficking? And what happens is fish stocks, the consumer demand for fish is outpacing the supply. So there's an incredible demand for fish products. Actually, I have to say I had fish for dinner. But about 160 million tons of seafood is demanded by the consumer market every year. Yet a third of the world's fisheries are are overfished, and 58% are fully depleted. So what this means is that the fish stocks close to land are becoming depleted. Fishing boats have to go further out into sea. What does that mean? It means increased fuel costs. To offset these fuel costs, they are going to cut on labor. How do you cut on labor? You traffic. You use, it's also been called modern slavery or sea slavery. A common practice in fishing is what's called transshipment. So a little boat, maybe for 20 people, will go out. They have 30 people on board. That boat stays out on sea for years. A big ship comes, and every couple of months or days or whatever, it comes by the little ship, takes the catch, the big ship goes into port. So the big ship is the one that is inspected, not the one that's out in sea. This is a practice called transshipment. So this is a problem specifically, and it's global, but mainly in Southeast Asia. So there's a lot of, it's a complex systems problem. There's a lot of interdependencies. There's the fish stocks themselves, the ecological system. There's the system of consumer demand. There's a system of the legal sea fishing, illegal markets. There's policing involved. There's port authorities involved. It's a very interdependent supply chain. And there's a technique in operations research called simulation. It's a way of, it's kind of computer, almost like computer games, programming changes in a system over time. There's different types of simulation, and one is called system dynamics, and that is what this project is beginning to look at. And it works on the premises of differential equations, and does not require a lot of data, which is why this type of methodology is suitable for looking at this problem. But we have, it's still being built, but we have components of this fishing ecosystem being placed into a simulation model. So we have one for labor, we have one for legal labor, we have the liquidity, the consumer market. And what I have two students working on right now is they are looking at different remediation options or alternatives, such as policing in the seas, policing at port, inspections, consumer taxes, and looking at how that impacts traffic labor. And what we're able to do in simulation is we're able to experiment. We're able to experiment. What happens if I introduce a 10% consumer tax on fish? What happens if I increase the frequency of onboard inspections? What happens if I increase the frequency of port inspections? How does that change the number of people that are being trafficked? And this is still early work, but the green oscillations, those represent numbers of people being trafficked. And we're able to compare different solutions. So with this work, I'm starting, I'm starting it now, but in the fall I hope to go to Macau and work with some researchers in Thailand, really examining how we can build almost like a computer game for policymakers to look at the implications of making these of implementing some of these remediation rather than kind of experimenting on the fly. So, in closing, there is a shortage of technical solutions to address human trafficking. I really strongly believe that industrial engineers and operations researchers have an opportunity, but they can make a difference in this area. And that's it.
Дуже дякуємо пані Ренаті за презентацію, і ми маємо час для питань. Будь ласка.
I'm just wondering whether President Trump had any work with your institute before he suggested the big border with Mexico. And I'm just wondering, one thing is putting up a wall. Another way of maybe stopping it would be to increase the width of the canyons.
I can't comment on that, but I can comment that one of my colleagues on this, Andrew Trapp, he is actually being funded by the U.S. government, by the National Science Foundation, to mechanically design shelters to alleviate some of the pressure. Yeah, I can't comment directly on Trump.
Hi. I'm wondering about the mathematical models. So can you, if you develop a mathematical model, can you use parts of that in a different situation?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. I'm actually working with foster care. So for those of you that know Suzuka, the counties around it, and actually probably the county Suzuka is in, have a lot of social, there's actually a lot of children in foster care in those areas. And one project that I'm working on is actually involving scheduling and resource allocation. Traveling salesman problem, because I know we took it up engineering, but we're looking at a traveling salesman problem for scheduling foster care visitations, and I want to use the same mathematics in scheduling garment inspections, like for child labor. So they're similar parallels. So yes, they can be used in other areas.
Renata, very interesting talk since I'm a former logistician. That's why I came here tonight. Я тільки що приїхав з України, і я минулого тижня зустрівся із доктором Уляною Струм. І я їй питав, що діаспора може вам допомогти. У неї є проблема, що є 2500 шпиталів. There are 2,500 hospitals. They only need 400. So how do you solve the problem of reducing 2,500 hospitals to 400? And what I'm here tonight is to see if you and I will talk later on about how can your model help Ukraine rationalize the locations.
So that would be the reverse of what I'm doing. So that would be те, що я роблю в Нью-Йорку, because в Нью-Йорку там збільшаємо ми також відомимо a deployment strategy, like biggest bang for the buck, like incremental changes I can make that have the most impact. І я про то думала.
My questions are really directed at trying to understand how the legal system can be fixed up so that it's more effective in stopping trafficking. It's pretty evident from what you said and from, I guess, what is known publicly, that the economic forces are not going to do this on their own, even if we fiddle with the prices involved by taxation and fines and things of that nature. So I guess I'm going to ask a number of questions. You don't have to answer them all.
Do you want me to answer the first one?
But they all sort of stick around the central topic. The Traffic Victims Protection Act, is this something that is an international treaty? And how many countries have ratified it and so on? I mean, is it really binding?
So I'll answer the first question and then the second one. So the first question was about the economic markets. And in February, I attended a conference put on by the United Nations looking at that, and specifically putting pressure on financial institutions to look at traffickers have to put their money somewhere, and they funnel it somehow. And there is growing pressure on financial institutions to address that. I'm not an expert.
To identify the possible traffickers.
Yes, to identify and to identify the mechanisms in which the money is being moved. I'm not an expert in that at all. In terms of the Trafficking Victim Protections Act, that is a U.S. law. The Department of State is the one, they are the ones who are classifying these countries according to this law. In the year 2000, it's called the Palmero Protocol. That is an internationally recognized, it's not a law, it's like a protocol agreement, yeah. And that is internationally recognized. But the United States, their Trafficking in Persons report, their classification of systems, that is widely recognized. It's not a law, but it's just as a measure.
Now, the reason I asked whether it was a treaty, because one of the techniques that you have to make this whole scheme work is the ability to control internet traffic. So you want to be able to get at servers in various countries in order to find out who's talking to who. If you don't have an international treaty, just having one end of the communication won't help you.
And that was a big mistake in the United States. In the United States, there was something called Backpage.com, which was kind of a dark market. It wasn't dark; it was widely known for sexual trafficking activity. The United States government shut it down. Those servers moved overseas where the United States does not have the ability to prosecute. So that has been, there's been a lot of backlash against that for that reason.
Now, the models you described to me, they look very, very useful. The question I have is, any of these research level models, are any of them going to be turned into software which can be used in a variety of countries?
Yeah. So I did not talk about foster care, but actually, when I take my children to shop at Suzuka, I'm actually going to Orange County to talk about how to actually develop a software to use for foster care scheduling. One of my colleagues, he has done, actually I should have mentioned his name, Andrew Trapp. He and I work very closely together on this, and he has created models for matching refugees to cities, and that is actually being implemented in Sweden now. So the model that we're in the process of developing very early right now for New York City, we have the Mayor of New York City's office, the Office of the Mayor of New York City backing us on this.
And has your institution taken any steps to get intellectual property protection?
No,
for this one?
No, not yet.
And I guess the next interesting thing is, you mentioned a 3.5 million variable binary.
Yeah.
Are you actually solving this as a binary problem, or are you looking for a suboptimal solution?
No, we were not looking for suboptimal solutions. It was.
Thanks.
Одна з великих проблем – то є гроші, яких все бракує. Частина, чому грошей бракує, є, що люди не в повній свідомі, що то їх торкає. А друге моє питання – скільки людей, скільки жертв, the victims, в Північній Америці, є роджені в Америці? Чи це є все люди, що прийшли? Чи то Трамп може сказати, ну то дивіться, то все приїхало. Чи людям, до якої міри американці, канадці свідомі, що, напевно, частина, і яка частина, є справді їхні діти?
Я не знаю, скільки свідомо, але знаю, я працювала з одною лікаркою з Атланта, і вона працює головно з minors, з дітьми. І 83% child sex trafficking, U.S. citizens. So 83% of child sex trafficking victims are U.S. citizens.
Who's born?
Sorry?
Born? U.S. born?
U.S. citizen. I don't know if they're U.S.
Well, yeah,
born.
naturalized.
I know, but to be naturalized is something. 5 years. 5 years, you know. So I don't know. Але що відповісти до того, що мене найбільш здивувало є, це ще все такому, що трафікінг, то хтось з України, хтось десь з Америки приїжджає до Канади, до Америки, але то не є, то є дуже часто в Америці і в Канаді, то є діти, бездомні діти, діти, що перенесуться чи щось. That's the majority of the victims of Canadian Americans of sexual trafficking. Labor, to важне відрізняти між тому. Labor trafficking, there's a lot more formal, international, в Америці.
I think what we were discussing today is one aspect of worldwide corruption. And I think we should put our monies into research to find a vaccine against corruption.
Are you going to do it?
Може, I don't know, як Бог дасть. Силу.
How accurate are your predictions? Say, for example, you said it's optimal to build 2 shelters here as opposed to there. And secondly, what do the politicians make of it? I mean, do they pay attention to these predictions?
So I can't speak to the accuracy because this is projecting something that doesn't exist. It's a suggestion. But what I can speak to is I showed that picture, that iterative process. And one thing I've learned is that it's really, really important to collaborate with the decision makers. So I work with the Departments of Justice, I work with the Department of Homeland Security, I work with the Department of Health and Human Services, Child Welfare, and one thing I'm really beginning to understand and appreciate is to actually work with survivors. So work through people who have been through this before. So I can't speak, quote unquote, to if I'm right, but I can speak to how accurate my model is. And again, I'm not saying this is the right answer. I'm showing a range of possibilities for discussion. I recognize that the ultimate decision maker is the government, the funding agency. I can present them these things for a discussion. You know, oh, should we put it in Louisiana or Missouri? Here's what happens. And there's probably factors that I'm not able to consider in my model, but they understand. In terms of working, the second part, just going to pay the example about working with governments. So I am, I forgot the name right now, but I'm on a list. I can't remember the name of the list, but it's basically, like if the government has questions, there's a list of people that they can call to ask for, you know, to work with them. So I'm on this, I can't remember the name of this list right now, but I also work with the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Transportation. And they have advisory committees that they put together briefings for Congress. So I am on some of these committees that puts together these briefings that go to Congress.
That was a good job. Good work there. I had a question. Sir, you mentioned that human trafficking was the second largest trafficking after drug trafficking.
Yeah.
That's worldwide?
Yeah.
And you said something about the government funding the human trafficking next, and I think you said it was 300 times.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, you presented a model about optimal use of the funding that the American government's getting for human trafficking out through an industrial engineering point of view. I was just wondering, the 300 times more funding just doesn't seem like a good use of money to me. So my question is, why is the federal government not using the same model to allocate a more reasonable amount of money towards the human trafficking compared to the drug trafficking?
So I'm not a politician, and I don't know. I assume this has to do with historical, political reasons. I think human trafficking has always existed. You know, we know about slavery. I think it's been hidden from the population, you know, from kind of society for a long time. It's becoming increasingly recognized. And I think what's more important is the government is recognizing the moral implications, at least in the United States, the financial implications. So I do travel to DC, and there have been a number of meetings lately of researchers looking to illustrate to the government what are the financial implications of illicit markets. So illicit being human trafficking, wildlife trafficking, organ trafficking, and pharmaceutical trafficking. So the government is interested and is funding, and the National Science Foundation does have a new program looking at illicit markets. So the government funds researchers, the researchers address Congress, and Congress passes laws which eventually appropriates funding. So I think there is a change of discourse in the U.S. on this topic. So it's coming, I think, I hope.
Чи в Канаді є такі ваші
роблять таку роботу, як ви, чи ви співпрацюєте з Канадою?
Я би хотіла, але я не знаю. Я знаю, є одна в York University, я не знаю. Але я би дуже хотіла. Я знаю, що я кажу, що тільки 4 роки, але академічних, то досить мало. Але я шукаю, я наступного року йду на себе і шукаю, власне, за співробітниками в Канаді і в Україні.
You think Ukraine could use this model, and what are the chances of it using it?
Sure. So Ukraine is recognized as a tier 2 country, which means it's improving. I don't know a lot about what happens in Ukraine. I have some figures. I know that in 2013 they only spent $1 million on this, which does not match the scale of the problem. I think Ukraine, very few researchers I've spoken to, that's mainly been me, are receptive to it, but I couldn't tell you. Yeah. But I think there is a possibility.
I'm curious, how much of your work involves actually working with your data models on different tool chains? How much of it is researching what the issues are, and how much of it is data wrangling, trying to get the information to fit together?
So I'd say the biggest part is researching, so talking to people. I talk to people in Coburg. I talk to police investigators in Florida. I talk to ER physicians in Atlanta. So I do spend a lot of time talking to people, and I think that's really, really important. The data wrangling, once you get data, it's significant. I do have students, data science students, who are far more talented than I am who help me with that. And the third part was the modeling. Yeah, and that's the part I like. So I like that part, but I think the most part is researching, talking, and reading.
As one more questions, I will ask our last question. So there are quite a number of questions about collaboration between US, Canada, and Ukraine, and I just want to follow up on that. So first, would you be interested to potentially supervise students coming from Canada or US to Ukraine and doing research internships on this topic with applications to healthcare analytics, with applications to internally displaced people, or any other operation research model that may help Ukraine to basically develop. So there are quite a number of opportunities to really do that. So my next project that Daria mentioned, not all of you know that you can also come not only from Ukraine to Canada to do this research internship, you can come from Canada to Ukraine to do a research internship. So if you are a graduate student, master's, PhD, or even a senior undergraduate student at a Canadian university, you can get a scholarship of $6,000 Canadian and come to Ukraine for 3 to 6 months to do a research internship on one of these topics at one of the Ukrainian universities, of course collaborating potentially with Ukrainian government, with Ukrainian companies, and be supervised by Pani Renata or any other researcher. So I suggest that we think about those opportunities to really increase these type of research collaborations between Canada, US, and Ukraine, and try to apply these models in practice. And funding resources are there. So in the US, it's Fulbright, so you can go under the Fulbright program of the US government to Ukraine from US. You can go under the MIDEX program with the funding from Canadian government from Canada to Ukraine. So opportunities are there. So I think let's engage in that, and thank you to, if you want to answer some of these.
No, дуже рада. Я думаю, що це є проблема, що світова проблема. І що тільки якщо ми всі разом справді працюємо в інакших країнах, в інакших ділянках, то не є тільки operations research, то не є тільки computer science, criminology, так, є різні з цим.
Thank you to Pani Renata for